Hey folks, it's Josh Kurievsky, and this is the Modern Agile Show, episode 44. And I am here with my friend, Jeff Morgan, aka Cheezy. Uh,
Hey.
he he is an extremely accomplished and experienced agilist, DevOps person. He's been doing this type of agile DevOps work for a long time now. He goes back to the early 2000s when he started coaching. He is the co-founder of Industrial Logic Canada, which is very exciting. And he has authored books, including a book on cucumber and cheese, I think it's called.
That's right. That's right. Very good.
So we're going to have an interesting conversation. Thanks for joining, Jeff.
Well, thank you for having me, Josh. I'm happy to be here.
And I'll now switch to calling you Cheesy, which I normally do.
Okay. Sounds good.
So I know, so why don't we get started with something super exciting, which is you have a story that I really wanted to hear about, which is about a very conservative bank in Canada, a very large bank, and what you've managed to help them do.
Okay. Sure. Well, the bank is RBC. They're the second largest bank in Canada. Huge organization. What you might call a traditional bank, in that their software development practices maybe are what let's say they're not modern. We'll just leave it at that. And yet they had a great leader in one area of the bank who had this idea that he wanted to try to drive more toward a hypothesis-driven product design. In other words, he wanted to drive toward instead of an approach where instead of assuming we know what our customers want, assuming that we don't know what they want, but that we can formulate hypotheses around that and start to try to run experiments with the users to try to learn from the users along the way. Clearly, that's right in line with what I love to do. But there were a lot of technical challenges that existed there. Number one, being a traditional organization, even though they had some agile here or there, it was a very heavyweight Scrum, a large QA process, so large regression processes. And in order to drive those experimentations, I knew we had to get very close, if not all the way, to continuous deployment. And so here we are a few months later, and we are deploying software every day to production.
Wow.
And
So that's a huge change from what was the normal cadence of releases before that?
I think you would find that it would be different in different areas of the bank, but to have a group that would have maybe 4, 5, 6 deployments a year was not uncommon.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're having 4, 5, 6 production deployments a day. So
Wow,
yes,
that is insane. And so this is dealing with people's money, I assume.
yes,
Is it risk
absolutely.
intensive thing?
Yes, for sure. And to be quite honest, there was a lot of nervousness with a lot of the things that we have had to do along the way, because the organization is kind of conservative. And like I said, uh, you know, this was so radical for them that I can remember, Josh, the very first time that we did a live deployment in the middle of the day with real customers already on the system. Everyone was like so nervous about it. And they're like, everybody was waiting for something to happen. But after we had done that the 20th or the 30th or the 50th time, they kind of now just accepted that we can do this, and that we're able to keep the quality very high, and that. So it's been a great journey through there, and we still have a ways to go.
That's awesome. So now I'm familiar with continuous deployment and all that stuff because we've been doing it for years, and we used to talk a lot about ZDD, zero downtime deployments.
Mm-hmm.
So that was for us when we first started doing continuous deployment in industrial logic back in around 2010.
Mm-hmm.
Our first baby step towards true continuous deployment was getting to zero downtime deployments, which again, you could do that manually as long as there's no downtime in
Mm-hmm.
between deployments. Was that a first step for you, or was it there a different step?
So, I mean, there were a lot of steps. So we had to restructure the teams. We had to change the approach for how we could achieve quality. We had to change our source code management practices. We had to take their CI servers. We had to do a lot of enhancements around, the what a pipeline is, and actually push that out to the teams. So they already had a Pivotal Cloud Foundry infrastructure that made it fairly easy for us to do zero downtime deployment. So that was one of the nice pieces that was in place. But they were not leveraging that, because for the organization at that time, a deployment was everybody wake up at 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning and push code out, in a kind of automated fashion, but a very error-prone process, and then have lots of QA people kind of go through and verify everything was okay. And so clearly that was not something we could do going forward. So there have been changes on many fronts. One of which, for example, was eliminating all of the QA folks that we had. We have no testers. We have no Scrum Masters. We run a very, very, very lightweight Kanban
Mm-hmm.
approach for how we're doing all of our work.
And you've just talked about like the old days when deployments happened, at
Mm-hmm.
odd hours and stuff like that. Um, was there a sense of great relief, when it started to become more normal to deploy during the day and not have to be up at night?
Yeah, so it not only from the technical folks, but from senior management across the way as well. So, I mean, for us to be able to now deliver literally hundreds of times a month, hundreds of times a month, where maybe other areas of the bank where they're still only delivering, small, maybe once or twice a month. There definitely is recognition of what's happening. By the way, I don't want to leave the impression that this is happening all across this very large bank. This bank has, maybe 100,000 employees or more, and we're talking about 22 teams right now in this area. So it's a small footprint, but it has received a lot of recognition just because of what we've been able to do.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, because of the virus, there have been a lot of emergency new features that we've had to drive in. For example,
Mm-hmm.
things like the Canadian government has given money to individuals, to help support that, and we had to add a feature that allowed those individuals to actually go in through the website and set up so that it's all handled direct deposit as opposed to having checks mailed out, and so on and so on. There have been, dozens of little things like that that have come out that have been actually quite easy for us. We would get the requirements from the government, and 2 days, 3 days later or so, it's in production. And I just heard from an executive yesterday, as a matter of fact, that he has heard that all of the other Canadian banks are really, really struggling to keep up and to roll out these, because these are sort of government mandated changes, and many of them are missing the dates and the deadlines. And Justin Trudeau is making the announcement, and the bank doesn't have the infrastructure in place yet to support it. And so anyway, so being able
Yeah.
to rapidly deliver value, like that has come in very handy in these times.
I mean, it
It
sounds to
sounds
me,
to me,
people really
people really,
need they really need cash right now.
yes,
So, but this brings new light to the lean expression, concept to cash.
yes,
From having the idea, the government regulation, we need to do something, to literally putting cash in someone's hands, shortening the time to do that is so important given what's going on in the world right now.
yeah.
So the work you're doing is hugely impactful and important.
Mhm.
And hopefully it's a wake-up call to others, whether it's within that bank or elsewhere, that deployment needs to be a safe, um, frequently occurring activity
Mhm.
that is just considered normal.
Yes, absolutely. It's amazing how risky the traditional deployment is out there, and it's frightening. Most organizations, as you know, Josh, what we tend to have is we tend to have the production deployment be a one-off where it's done differently than it is everywhere else. So, and it's usually done by a different group. So there's also a handoff, and I can't think of a riskier thing to do than to try to, take our most important deployment, make it different so it's unique. It's a snowflake now, right? And have somebody who doesn't really understand the system do it. It's just insane the amount of risk by driving the risk out of the software from a quality perspective, by driving a risk out of the environment by applying DevOps practices in the teams, and by driving product risk out as well by being able to rapidly try new things. There's no other approach that is less risky for me than continuous deployment.
Yeah, and it brings to mind that, like, let's say we're talking about a conservative bank, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep.
they consider themselves conservative, right? If
Yes.
you talk to the bankers
Mm-hmm.
would say we're conservative, or we manage risk. My whole early professional career started at a bank on Wall Street.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, we were in a risk management area, so that's all we did was manage risk. Um, and I find that it's interesting that because bankers don't really understand technology, they don't actually understand that old, outdated approaches to software development are highly risky, the opposite of conservative, and don't match
Mm-hmm.
with the fabric of the organization, which is to be conservative. So it's
Exactly.
like bringing this to their awareness is super important, that, hey, you've got a process here that's super risky and doesn't fit the culture of this company, which is, let's be conservative.
What I find is so often, especially companies that are in the financial industries, they tend to be conservative financially, i.e., they look for the least expensive way to do something. And so, yes, that offshore QA group is much less expensive than having people, onshore do it, et cetera. Or somebody who maybe is a tester is less expensive than a developer. So let's offload work to them. But to be quite honest, the financial cost is minuscule when I look at the overall risk. And by the way, the rate at which you're able to streamline, the delivery of things whenever you don't have handoffs completely offsets that financial bump significantly in my experience. So
So
anyway.
you're basically, you are applying a lot of lean principles to the work you do.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
I think it's very common to sort of in the agile coaching space to sort of subdivide people as, oh, that person's technical, and oh, this person's process. And I know that we at Industrial Logic don't even consider those boundaries whatsoever. We literally
Mm-hmm.
think that a talented agilist, talented lean practitioner
Mm-hmm.
can do both. They can
Yeah.
help with process. They can help with the technology, bring it all together. Ultimately to deliver from concept to cash, to get into delivering the right thing too. We big practitioners of lean startup, and as you said, the manager in the area is humble enough to say, we want to be able to experiment in production. We want to be able to find out what is relevant. So are there any, I want to get to, by the way, how you got rid of all your QA
Mm-hmm.
staff, talk a little bit about that.
Mm-hmm.
But before that, are there any stories of experiments that you were able to put into production rapidly from which you gathered data and helped to make good product decisions?
Wow, there are so many right now that I don't even know where to begin. At any time, we've probably got a few dozen experiments running. So it's not only what you might think of as some of the experiments, but it's also we're doing a lot of contrast like A/B type reviews and things such as this. So the interesting thing is that we also are dealing with very distinct areas of the bank as well. So we've got kind of four distinct product areas. We've got the area which is the online banking. So it would be where if you and I had an account, for example, where we would go to look at our balances, to transfer money, to pay bills, pay our credit card, whatever it might be. So the online banking side of things. There's also the mortgage side that we've been working on delivering products with. There's the software that runs inside of the branch offices, where we've also been ideating there and iterating around that, where we've been able to take processes that they had that would take, anywhere up to 45 minutes to an hour, and cut those down to, 5 to 7 minutes, for example. And then finally, there's also more of the business-focused banking, which is for small businesses. So we're working across all of those different areas right now. So
Fantastic. So,
yeah.
okay, let's get to the topic of
Mm-hmm.
your QA staff.
Sure.
What can you say about that? How did it come to be that you were able to let them go, and then what replaced it, if anything? What can you say about that?
Well, so over the years for me, what I found is and this is going to sound counterintuitive to most of our listeners, Josh, but I found that adding a QA staff in an organization that wants to deliver very rapidly. I'm not talking about a traditional organization, but an organization that wants to deliver software every day or many times a day. Adding QA into that mix actually drives quality lower. And the reason that I've experienced that, first of all, it requires a handoff, which in and of itself is problematic, and a lot of things get lost there. It might create competition or things like that. But secondarily, the folks who are in a QA role, they typically don't have the right tools to be able to test the software thoroughly. They typically test it from the outside, which has a couple of negative connotations, or a couple of negative impacts. First of all, you have to wait till something's fairly close to finish before you can actually begin testing it, because you have to have that thing there to test. Secondly, testing from the outside means that it's virtually impossible to test all of the logic that exists, especially in larger complex apps that have many layers. There's so much going on, and testing it from the outside, you might be able to skim a happy path and maybe a handful of negative cases, but guess what? There literally are hundreds and hundreds of negative cases throughout all of the layers of that. And the only way to truly test that thing is to test it from the inside. And so anyway, how did we get to there? Well, whenever we started building teams in this area, we basically said that, hey, we want our developers to be responsible for quality. Or actually, it's not even that, it's the whole team. Which we can maybe get into team composition in just a moment. And there was a lot of nervousness about that. And we've had a couple of times where, let's say, groups outside of our area came in and said, there's no way you guys can be delivering quality. You need to have more QA folks. You need to have testers. But as we've been able to continuously deliver with very high quality, those voices have kind of over time fallen away.
And does that include, are you doing a lot of automated testing? Are you doing test-driven development, or behavior-driven development, or both? Can you say more?
If I would talk about what our quality approach looks like, unit tests, TDD unit tests are the foundation for everything. I'm going to say probably well in excess of 90% of all of the tests are unit tests. The majority of the cases written using a TDD style, but that's not kind of universal across all of the teams yet. Above that, we do have a few of what we call component tests. And this would be where I start up a component, but whatever it might talk to, it's all mocked. So for example, if I'm building an Angular app, and that's what I'm working on, I would maybe start up the Angular app, but it wouldn't talk to real services behind it. It would just talk to some mocks. And we have a few of those, not too many. Because we're calling out to other areas of the bank where maybe they're not following the same practices or have a lot of the same rigor, we've introduced contract tests that we're using with some of our back-end partners just to ensure that they can have insight into whenever they make a change that will break us. What we had before that, Josh, you've probably seen this before, is a back-end team says, hey, we made a change. Show me your regression test plan. How are you going to test to make sure our change doesn't break you?
Yeah, that's
So
that's
yeah,
not
so
too
by
good.
introducing contract tests, we put that to rest. It's like,
Right.
here's a test. I want you to run this as part of your test suite. If the test doesn't break, don't contact me. If it breaks, let me know,
Yeah.
and we'll deal with it.
Hmm.
So we have that. We've
Isn't it
also
funny though, just for a minute here, that such a basic concept of a contract test, it just doesn't seem to occur to so many groups, and that
yeah.
they continue to use a style of just, hey, you tell me when this, like, you want, it's I find it fascinating because it's in some ways it mirrors a little bit of what Amazon noticed, which is that,
Mhm.
and this is very counterintuitive, is that they didn't want small teams having to talk to each other. So by getting into their microservices,
Mhm.
they could just work independently and harmoniously with other groups,
Mhm.
provided that their service was meeting the requirements. Or it's funny because a lot of times we talk about collaboration, we want more and more interpersonal collaboration, but in some sense what you're saying here is you kind of wanted a little bit less with a technology solution.
Yes, yes. Well, at least whenever we were interacting with like I said, some of what we'll call the legacy teams for sure. So on the functional side, the last thing that we've layered in is what is exploratory testing. So I know you had Elizabeth Hendrickson as a guest a few weeks back. We have circulated her books around quite a bit. All of our developers have, I've put together some exploratory testing classes. They've all attended it. And so, in fact, that is the only case where we actually try to run things end to end. We have no end to end automation because they're way too unreliable, and so we actually treat our pipeline as production, and so teams don't want to run end to end tests in their pipeline because they want no brittle tests or no uncertainty.
Wow.
So what a lot of the teams will do is they'll push something out to production or out to an environment, open up the feature toggles and test it there, more in an exploratory testing approach. Once they're confident, then so
So that brings a question then to mind.
yeah.
A couple of questions. All right. One is, first of all, I just had Marit on the show
Mhm.
just before this show. I'm not going to try to pronounce her last name right now because I'll butcher it. But Marit does mob testing,
Mhm.
and she's getting a lot of benefit out of that. They produce, the company she works for produces security software for like Windows machines. So it's very complicated, very developer centric stuff, and they
Mhm.
find that the mob testing is a very good way to get things going. Um, just as an aside, she's also written a book on exploratory testing as well. I'm a huge fan of exploratory testing. I think that, I've worked with teams where we taught them from the ground up how to do test-driven development, and some level of acceptance testing as well. And those teams were really hardcore, really doing it well. And still there were some defects, and they were uncovered ultimately via exploratory testing. So, I'm a
Mhm.
big fan of it. But one question I have is, how many environments do you have? So from a developer machine to getting into production, what's the typical, are there like, is there a QA environment? Is there like another environment and yet another? Like some companies have a lot of different
Mhm.
environments. It's kind of scary.
Yeah, we don't. So so this is our current state, which by the way is not our end state. But where we are right now is once you push your code to master, it goes to an environment that they call user acceptance test or UAT. That's where our pipeline delivers it, and that is the first time where you can go out and do some exploratory testing. Okay. Our process that we have right now is what is in UAT today automatically goes to production tomorrow. So we've got that 1 day's of delay kind of built in right now, and so when I say we're going to production every day, well, if I check code in and merge that code today, or check that code in today, that code will be in production tomorrow. It will be in UAT today. but it will go into production tomorrow. And so
So if you find a
that's kind of,
problem, sorry to interrupt, but if you find a problem, you could undo it.
Mhm.
You could put something safe back in place. You have an opportunity, a window.
Yeah, and actually we don't find that many problems. And by the way, we're using feature toggles quite extensively as well. So even if there is a problem, we let the code goes anyway. It's just turned off, so it's not an issue there. And less of it's code that maybe has affected something that is on or something that's live. Then there might be something there. But yeah, as far as where we are at the bank, that's how far we've evolved. That's not our end goal. Our end goal is every commit goes straight out to production, but baby steps. Where we are now is
Yeah.
significantly further than we were just a few short months ago.
Oh
So.
yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah. In 2010, when we started switching to continuous deployment for our e-learning software, we've never had a UAT environment. So,
Mhm, mhm,
we test on our local machines, and if
mhm,
it's good there, then we go live. We do have a little fail-safe mechanism to switch back to a prior build. And anyone could hit that switch if they needed to. Even a non-technical person was taught how to like go into this Jenkins environment, press this thing, and then
mhm,
you're back on the older build, if that was ever needed. And I
mhm.
barely ever was. Do you find that when people start doing continuous delivery or continuous deployment, that they start to maybe be a little more disciplined, a little more careful?
Without a doubt. So all of the developers I'm working with now did not come from that background. So they always had that safety net, and a lot of them had the mindset that, oh, there's somebody who's going to catch the defects for us later. And whenever I first started working with this group, whenever our deployments were, every 2 weeks or so, they felt kind of okay with that. But as we started continuing to evolve, and we got to a point where, the very first iteration, it was kind of a 4-day pipeline. All of a sudden, it's like, wow, when I commit code, it's on a path to automatically get out there. And by the way, we've had a few production defects that have made it out, and so all of a sudden, absolutely, people take it more serious. Developers become far more detailed oriented. You'd mentioned your experience with the XP team and how the exploratory testing helped them catch things. What I have found is once you teach developers really good structured exploratory testing, it changes the way that they write their tests, their automation as well. So I think those things kind of feed on each other to really drive the quality high. And I can tell you right now, we are absolutely delivering high quality software where defects that make it to production are very, very low. We used to track escaped defects early on,
Hmm.
but we've stopped tracking it because it's a non-issue now.
Yeah, that's just amazing, fantastic. And the people that you're working with, I'm sure, could never go back to the old way.
No, no, they wouldn't do that.
I mean, once you experience this style, it's just glorious. It brings more of the joy of software development
Mhm,
to one's career, and
mhm,
that's a very, very special thing. And I would also imagine the managers in the area would be like, hey, no way am I going back to a
mhm.
few releases a year when I can release many times per day. I mean,
It's the product people who are so ecstatic, again, that I one of the things that I did is I got them in the driver's seat of this
yeah,
because from my experience, these sort of initiatives that are driven from a technical perspective uh, don't have the right level of wind in their sail, I think.
right.
But to have the business people who are like, yes, I want to do this, I want to learn, I want to rapidly take that learning that we're having and roll it right back into the product as quickly as I can.
Mhm.
And for example, our product people own all the feature toggles and completely own release now. So developers have nothing to do with release.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so and the
Hmm.
way that we've helped them learn how to segment out the releases and incrementally go out has also been, it's part of the quality strategy as well.
Yeah, yeah. Is there any the auditing or compliance that you have to be concerned with?
So, we've automated a lot of things through our pipeline that handles so many of the concerns. For example, we built some custom tools that go out. So we're using some smart commits, or we're putting certain tags inside of our Git commits, and we have a tool that goes out, looks at the commits that have occurred, gets that Jira story number, because yes, we are using Jira, actually does a reverse lookup into Jira to get the user story title, pulls them together, creates a Git diff link, and generates these automated release notes each day of what is going into production. And then those get sent out automatically on email, and they also get posted to the team's Slack channels, because we can map back to which teams had brought about the changes. And so it shows what user stories went in. There's a quick link there where you can click the link, and it will show you the diffs. It tells you how many commits are made, which developers were involved in it, and stuff. So like I said, we built some automation along the way to handle the majority of those. We've auto-approved releases now, because there's this requirement that you have somebody approve it. That's all automated, so it's no touch. Once your code is merged into master, once your code is in master, it's no touch out to production.
Now, this to me sounds a lot like what Dave Farley calls continuous compliance. And he's had experience doing that. He's been on the Modern Agile Show as well, and he's had experience with a very large-scale trading environment, the biggest one in the UK. Building in a continuous compliance piece to their continuous deployment pipeline, so that there's a continuous stream of data that compliance officers or auditors can look at to understand what's happening to this system. I think it's just so far beyond where things used to be, and how slow they used to be, where an auditor had to come in, or a compliance person, and look over static documentation files and this and that. This is the future.
Well, yeah, everything is completely traceable and auditable, all the way from the pipelines up through the source code repositories and the tools. So in many ways, so my experience, not only at this particular client where I'm at right now, but the last few clients, or let's say the last 5 or 6 years worth of working in this fashion, is that once you finally have a chance to sit down with auditors and explain to them the level of automation, and explain to them the no hands or the hands-off approach, and how traceable it really is, in many ways, and many times they become like the biggest fan. Because the big risks from their perspective are removed from the system.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. We've seen very similar experiences with, having them see our executable documentation for a system that we've, producing these executable specifications that, A, they document the system, B, they kind of help with a little bit of acceptance testing, and they don't have to be like fragile. They can be a little under the covers, hitting them business model stuff. And C, they help. They can help auditors to confirm that, yes, we do have documentation. Yes, it is up to date because it actually runs against the system. And while that wasn't being used back in the day when I was doing it in the continuous deployment pipeline, it was still far better than what these auditors had ever seen before in terms of, just what it did. Interesting. So let's segue quickly here to some other work you're doing. I know you teach online as well. Tell us more about that. What are you doing there?
So I'm running what we call facilitated e-learning. And what that is I'm meeting with teams once a week, or actually not even with the teams. I'm meeting with team leads once a week, and we're discussing the lessons that we're going to be doing. I often kind of have a little bit of a slide deck that I put together where I walked them through maybe a little bit different view. And then we talk about what they've completed over the past week, and so the team leads are basically going back and working with their team over the course of the week to implement the exercises. And the whole goal here, first of all, is to keep them moving through it, and second of all, to help them learn how to apply it, the things that we're learning as we're learning it. So, for example, let's say if we had completed maybe some refactoring exercises and the maybe the extract method refactoring was one of the lessons that we had learned the previous week. I would talk to them about how, whenever they're reviewing pull requests or whenever they're working with their team or whenever they're doing code reviews or whatever it is, how do we start to apply this in real time? And so the goal here is to take small little steps through eLearning, which we're doing 2 to 3 hours or so of eLearning a week, but to make sure that whatever it is that we're learning, as quickly as possible, we start using it in our day-to-day work. And so I'm doing this with a couple of companies right now, and it's going really well.
Oh, that's really great. I think with the virus and stuff going on, people still need to upgrade their skills in order to learn the ability to perform things like DevOps. So it's more important than ever to gain these skills and stop working in the old-fashioned way. So that's terrific. Well, glad to hear that's working well.
Yeah.
And I agree, giving people the chance to actually implement what they're learning and then come back and work with an instructor is super important, because you can't just expect people to, be given some e-learning and say, hey, go do it, go learn from it, see you later. That doesn't tend to be a great successful approach. You got to interact with them.
That's right. So, having to meet with me once a week kind of puts a little bit of pressure on them, unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it, to make sure that they actually do the exercises. But then also me having them talk about how have you applied it, give me some examples,
Yes.
and even coaching them along, things that they can do, how they do it, how much to do, how little to do,
Yes.
is encouraging them to in the moment, as opposed to, we all know people who've gone to workshops and then it's like 6 months after the workshop before they try to actually apply what they're doing. So
Right.
I'm trying to make that timeline, a few hours or worst case, a few days.
I think there's a lean concept here, right? It's
Yeah.
smaller batches,
Exactly.
so awesome. Well, Cheezy, thank you so much for coming on the show,
You're
taking
welcome.
some time to share your amazing stories and wisdom. I think it's just been a fascinating journey through what you're doing, and I look forward to hearing more about what happens there and how it potentially will, be spread to others who are inspired to upgrade to this form of software development that's ultimately, I think, serving people better.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you, Josh. I've had a great time.
Awesome. Well, if you enjoyed the show, please watch the YouTube space, share it with others. You could subscribe to the YouTube channel. We appreciate anything you can do for the show. And thanks again for watching.
Thank you.